Hello and welcome to another episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. In this episode I shall be attempting to perform a makeover on this model of yesteryear. It's the number 7 1918 4-ton Leyland delivery van. They were produced between 1957 and 1960 by Matchbox. They are a 1/100th scale model. And this particular delivery van has the decals on it that say that it was delivering for W&R Jacob & Co., which you might know as Jacob's Biscuits, as they are still going today. And this company, which was originally an Irish company, was founded in 1851. Can you believe that? It's still going today, and it's famous for its cream crackers and twiglets. Now, prior to today... So yesterday I was in my local supermarket and I was looking for some Jacob's cream crackers and twiglets so I can show you what they look like. Unfortunately I couldn't find any, so I can only assume that they're not available in Australia. So for this model, Matchbox painted it in a burgundy red. It has a cream or off-white roof, a silver grille and grey metal wheels, which are totally unique to this model. No other Matchbox model came out with this type of wheels. This one has a lot of signs of wear on it. The decals obviously are worn off, and it has some corrosion on the wheels which looks unfamiliar to me. I'm not too sure what kind of corrosion that is. And not only is it on the wheels, but it's also extended to the underside of the chassis and the leaf springs. Okay, rear doors don't open. They are just sealed, one piece. Get out of it! So it's got two doors on the back with handles and windows. It's got little side windows there above the open cabin. The cabin is open, it has doors but no windscreen and no windscreen supports. So it was actually an open cabbed vehicle. Has a front radiator there with a radiator cap. The wheels on the back are bigger than the ones on the front, and the roof is held onto the chassis by one rivet in the base there. The axles are bent, so I'm hoping to replace those somehow and get these wheels looking good. That corrosion is definitely a bit of a concern though. I'm not too sure the extent of the corrosion and whether or not it's damaged the model, so I won't know until I've cleaned it all off. So I'm going to remove the wheels first. I'm going to cut the axles in half today for something different. I'm using this Dremel with the circular cutting tool on it. I'm very gently cutting into the axle here. Don't want to push too hard in case I dig it into the base of the model. So very, very careful indeed. So I'm through on the front one and I'm just pulling those wheels off now so I can have a better look at them, and also a better look at the base. I think I might have just kissed it there with the grindstone, so I'm not happy with that. Anyway, I go for the front one. This one should be a little bit easier as there's a bit more clearance between the axle and the model. Oh yes, that was quite simple. I'm through there. I just held on by one burr and there you go, it's come off. So now I can separate these axle stubs from the wheels and have a look at them. Okay, that one's quite clean on the outside, but is it the outside or the inside? I'm not too sure. There is a very subtle difference in these wheels between the outside and the inside. There you can see that there is a tiny little bit of a axle support on the inside of the wheels. Now to clean this corrosion off, it looks quite heavy, very rust-like, but I don't think these would have rust on them, and if they did, why isn't it all over the wheel? Not on, it's just on part of the wheel. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Just using these little dental tools to try and scrape the surface corrosion off and see exactly the extent of any damage that may have been caused. And in doing so, I think I'm creating damage, scuffing up the face of the original wheel. So I don't actually think it's penetrated the metal, and it may not indeed be corrosion. It might just be ground coffee grinds or leftover food or something on there. I'm not too sure. If it's been on there for 50 years, it's no wonder it's difficult to get off. And it is very difficult to get off. I use various tools. This one here is not a dental tool, but it's actual modelling chisel. It's a very fine point chisel. And I get off as much as I can using that rather sort of coarse action or sort of brutal method. Now I've resorted to the soft bristle wire brush. I think it might be copper bristles. No, brass bristles. Who knows? And I just clean them up with the rotary tool and a stainless steel wire brush. And they're starting to look like they should. And I'm quite happy. I'm glad to report that there's no damage on them, and that the corrosion, or whatever that was, has come off, and the wheels are now completely clean and grime free. So to start this restoration off, I'm getting out my tiny little cheap plastic vise, bench mounted vise here. And the only thing I use it for is this, which is where I put the cocktail sticks into it, and I put wheels onto the cocktail sticks. Hang on, that's not right. They shouldn't go all the way down like that. That one cocktail stick is weird. It's a collector's item right there. It's a 1 in 1,000 cocktail stick that's too thin. There you go. I've replaced it with a normal cocktail stick, and now I can work on these wheels with this SMS paint. I'm going to give them a bit of a coat, a bit of a dust over with a blend of paint to try and make a sort of a gunmetal grey, and it should be good. Looking at this, I can't remember why I got that die cutting tool out. I'm sure it will come to me any second. I do remember mixing the paint, but I don't remember what I got that tool out for. So stand by and I shall enlighten you, and I shall enlighten myself, because I'm watching this video for the first time and narrating as I go. Oh, that's right, yes. This little tool, this handpiece, is the exact colour I'm trying to match. So I'm using it to test the paint on that I'm mixing up, and I'm putting on various dabs of paint there to see if the colour matches the tool, and if it does, then I'm happy to put that colour onto the wheels. So it's a little bit dark, and then I go a little bit lighter, and it gives me a guide, and eventually I get to this stage where I can just put on this little dab of paint onto that die holding tool. It's for cutting external threads on bolts and things like that. And it seems to look pretty good. I imagine that's as close as I'm going to get. So I run with that. And I'm going to give these wheels a quick dust over with that colour in the spray booth on the plastic stand. And this will be phase 1 of the makeover. So stay tuned, there's more to come. I'm putting on a very light coat. I don't want to obscure any of the details on the wheels. Limited as they are, I just want to give them a bit of a facelift and make them look fresh again. And I think I've achieved this. When you look at those wheels, they actually look brand new, like they've just come out of the casting, which is great. Now I'm making up the paint for the main body of the truck. So I've used all of these paints that you can see there, the Mr. Hobby brands. I'm not mixing the paints today. I'm just using, well, I am mixing it. There I am mixing it now. But I mean, I'm not mixing it, i.e. using Mr. Hobby with Tamiya or vice versa, or SMS. Oh, maybe I'll stop talking. Ultimately, using these colours, I make up a very, very close match to the original colour, which I am pleased with. It did take a bit of effort to get there and a lot of paint. So these makeovers, you wouldn't believe, but they are very expensive to do because, for example, today I'm using 4 paints just to paint the body. As for the roof, I've got to make up some off-white. And off-white is a very difficult colour to reproduce. So that is the off-white, Mr. Hobby off-white colour, straight out of the bottle. And it's nowhere near the colour I'm trying to get. So I just mess around here with different whites. See, that's too light, that's no good. And I realise I'm going to have to use a bit of experimentation here. So again, Mr. Hobby paint there, number 74, is a very light green. Because I feel that the colour on the cabin roof there, or the colour on the roof of this model's got a touch of green on it. So I put one little drop of green into the white. I don't know if you saw that there, it was in slow motion. If you missed it, rewind and watch that bit again, because it took me 15 minutes to film. I also add a tiny tad of the tan, a tad of the tan. So I've set them aside now in those little fast food sauce pots with lids, and they are ready to use. Now I can confidently remove the paint off of the model, knowing that I have the paint sitting there in my hobby room ready to be used. It's always very satisfying removing the paint with this polish stripper, paint stripper. It does a great job. It's probably going to be illegal to buy soon, I imagine, so I'm just using it for now until they pull it off the shelves, because no doubt it's damaging something on the planet by producing it. If they keep selling it, I'll keep buying it. So after paint stripping it, I give it a light coat of the Tamiya light grey, so a light coat of the light grey. And now, looking at it, you can see that this is quite a nicely detailed model. It has door handles, door hinges, loads and loads of little rivets there on the engine compartment. Has some air vents on the side. Again, tiny little hinges. A small door that looks like door, window, I'm not too sure what it is. And on the back we've got that lovely vintage looking door with the oval windows. Wouldn't let much light in, I wouldn't think. You can see underneath there I did have a slight little bit of damage there after I removed the axle. And I do put some putty in there and sand it down, hopefully to obscure it in the final reveal. So I'm holding the model by that axle hole there where the axle goes through on the front, and you have to find a spot. That's the only spot I felt would do. And after I've painted it with this lovely burgundy red and it's dry, I then touch up the little bit there where the forceps are holding it. It's one of those things you've got to do. So I have in the past glued a screw onto the base. Actually, a long time ago I used to glue screws on the base and use those to hold the model, but I don't do that anymore. So I set that to dry, and now I am looking at these axle ends, and for today something different. Something I've seen other people do, but I don't think I've ever done it myself. I've never had the correct diameter material. I'm going to make a little tubed sleeve that's going to go between the axle ends underneath the model to join the axle and put the wheels back on, rather than flattening the end with vice grips or a drill press. I'm going to try this for something different, as it makes for an interesting test to see whether I can do it, or whether I need to order some new material or maybe practice a little bit more. So this is, I forget what diameter it is. It's quite thin, obviously. It's a very thin diameter aluminium tube. And the idea is I'm going to cut a little piece off and use it to join the cut section of the axles. So I'm just trying to work out the diameter that I need to make this task possible. So it looks like the axles are 1.4 millimeters in diameter. This bit of metal wire is 1.4 millimeters also, so it's the same size as the axle. So I'm going to use it as a gauge to see if the tubing I've got is the right size. Oh yes, that fits in there. Well, still not quite enough. So I'm going to have to drill that cylinder out, that cylindrical aluminium rod I've got. I'm going to have to, or tubing, I'm going to have to drill it out slightly. So I've got this tiny set of drills. It says 1.4 there, and that's what I need. So if the internal diameter of this tube is 1.4, then in theory the outside diameter of 1.4 of the original axle, God, this is difficult for me to explain in words, but I think you get the picture. I'm going to drill this out and put the axle in the hole. Let's have a test here. I'm seeing if that fits in there. And it does. It actually fits into the bit that I've drilled out. Now, ordinarily I wouldn't bother drilling them out if I had the correct size tubing, but I don't have the correct size tubing, so I'm drilling them out. And I've also had to cut it just long enough to fit between those two axle supports, try and make it an invisible join. We shall see what happens towards the end. Now today as well, for something different, I thought I wouldn't remove the rivet in the bottom. I would mask off the roof and paint it as best I can in my spray booth without getting any overspray on the model. I know what you're thinking, that's almost an impossible task, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So I've masked off that roof with the intention of removing the masking tape and painting the edge of the roof with a paintbrush. Now I think I may have bitten off more than I can chew, because I start spraying the roof and it's not going as planned. Because I can't move the airbrush over in sweeping strokes over the model, I have to kind of do concentrated bursts in that little box I've made. And initially it looks really rubbish and I'm a little bit disappointed. So what I do is I flood the area with excess paint and I set it aside to dry overnight. And lo and behold, the next morning when I lift this fruit bowl dome off, I look at it and it's kind of leveled out quite well, and I'm thinking I can disguise that little ripple there with some Tamiya fine, not the fine primer, the Tamiya gloss varnish, hopefully. Let's see how the masking went. And the masking went absolutely fantastic, probably because I squeezed it down with the end of that toothpick, if you noticed that earlier on, and I'm very, very pleased. I'm thinking, well, you know what, I can live with that. That's better than I actually thought I was going to get. After I started, I felt would fail. I've just got to touch up the edge around the roof. That's a little bit tedious and fiddly. Luckily, I've made excess paint, so I've still got some in that little sauce pot there. And just with a fine brush and some delicate paintbrush work there, I managed to paint the edge of the roof and the back there where, I don't know if you noticed when I removed the masking tape, a small flake of the burgundy came off, but that is 100% concealed by this paint. So overall I am very, very pleased with the first day's work. The model has been painted burgundy, so I place it in front of the fire there for a couple of hours to harden the paint. After it was dry, I painted the rivet underneath matching colour and placed it upside down in the hobby room and left it overnight. In the morning I went to check on my progress and was horrified to see that overnight the roof had taken on the texture of the paper towel. So I realise at this stage I've got no option. I'm going to have to drill that rivet out after all, remove the roof, restrip it and respray it. Having done that, I can now resume putting it back together. So I start with the wheels here, the rear wheels, and I've got those cut down axle stubs in position, and I have cut a small length of tubing to suit. And now I'm using finger pressure just to start those wheels off and trying to tease them together, pushing them in the tube that I've drilled out. And it looks a little bit wonky at the moment because they're in there just loose. So I decided I've got to give them a bit of a tap with a small hammer. I don't want to damage the model, so I just give it a tiny little tap there, pop, pop, a couple of taps, and just make sure that those axle ends go in straight. And I'm just so pleased because this model has been in the process now for a couple of days. This is probably day 2. Many hours spent on it already, but now I can see light at the end of the tunnel. Now, after having removed the roof and having to respray it, I was a little bit disheartened then. But now that both sets of wheels back on, I'm thinking this is now going to be an easy fix. Before I put the roof on, because I'm paranoid now that I'm going to damage the roof and have to repaint it again, I thought I'd go with these decals that I bought from Recover Toy. And they are exceedingly good details. And I'm looking here and I'm thinking I'm going to have to trim these exactly to the right size, because they are exactly the right size and they won't go on any other way unless they're trimmed, I fear. I've noticed there are left and right handed decals. There's a little cursive swirl or whatever you call it on the corners, and that corner swirl goes at the back. And I've also had to cut out where the wheel guards are, otherwise the decal wouldn't fit, it would overlap the wheel guard. So once again I've got the warm water and the wet sponge and the small tweezers, etc. You've probably seen all this before, but I do like showing it anyway in case this is your first video of mine that you've seen. So I just dampen down the side of the van there, and that gives me a little bit of extra time to slide the decal into position. So after the decal has released from the backing paper, as usual, I just pull it off a tiny little bit and hold it in place and then withdraw the backing paper. Then I line it up using toothpicks if necessary, or sometimes just finger pressure. Depends how much moisture I've got on the model prior to applying the decal. Now here is something I didn't perceive. That little oval window, the decal actually goes over it. So I'm going to have to, I tried to poke it out there with a toothpick, but the whole decal shifted. So I had to reseat it, and I ended up poking out that hole with a craft knife after it had dried. I then fitted some of this Tamiya Mark Fit decal solution to make this decal sit nicely over the seams on the doors, and it seemed to work. Anyway, long story short, I sprayed over the decals with some Tamiya gloss varnish, which is what I normally do. And when I came back to check to see if it was dry, the decal had completely crinkled up and looked absolutely dreadful. It was unacceptable. And the only option I had was to remove the wheels, strip the model back to its basic metal base, and repaint it again and order new decals. And the new decals took 6 days to come. And when they came, I went through all the same old process again. I put them on and I noticed that they were faulty decals in that the white element of the decal, because it's 3 colours, yellow, black and white, the white element was out of sync with the others. So it was a production error, but I have no other option but to run with it. And it looks not the best, to say the least. So I should probably be contacting the supplier. It's an oversight, I don't know. Manufacturing process, I imagine it's quite fiddly, but yeah, the first ones were perfect and these second ones weren't, so I was a little bit annoyed about that. Time to put the roof on now. I feel confident enough to put it on. Finally it's dried. Just showing you there's a couple of pegs protruding from the roof, so you can align it perfectly when you snap it on, and it does snap on. It's got a nice feel to it. And then, as usual, I'm putting in the... This wasn't going to be usual. Remember, I was going to leave the original rivet. Well, unfortunately, as usual, I'm putting in a colour-matched button head screw there. And now I'm just checking it out to see what else needs to be done. That roof is seated correctly. And there's only one other thing to do, and that is paint the grille silver. And also highlight the radiator cap with some chrome paint or chrome ink. Here I'm using the Molotov chrome ink. And once again I use way too much, but it's very difficult to stop it coming out. So a very fine brush here, and I start to paint the grille, and I swear this model is jinxed, because you probably can't see, but the silver ink kind of diluted the burgundy paint on the grille, and I ended up with pink silver. And this model has been, the makeover has been going for 8 days now. And I just thought that was the last straw. I wanted to throw it across the room. Anyway, I persevered, and eventually I got the radiator looking right. And so now here is the final reveal, and it's not as good as it should be, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was. I think you'll agree. The roof looks absolutely amazing. That's the first thing. The wheels have been transformed with all that corrosion removed. The axle looks pretty good, although I won't probably be doing this method again because I don't approve of it and I don't like it, but I just thought I'd try it as something new. And the grille and the radiator cap, thankfully, became silver after I cleaned off the pink silver and applied another couple of coats. So here's the finished product, and it's showing it's in its hometown of Basingstoke in England back in the 1918, which was when the end of the First World War and people started eating biscuits again, which was pretty good for Jacobs, I'm guessing. I'm glad the war ended. And until next time, this is Marty from Marty's Matchbox Makeovers saying goodbye. You idiot. Oh!